be released. The Attorney General preferred to make the entire report public all at once, and we appreciate that the Attorney General made the report largely public, and I certainly do not question the Attorney General's good faith in that decision. Now, I hope and expect this to be the only time that I will speak to you in this manner. I am making that decision myself. No one has told me whether I can or should testify or speak further about this matter. There has been discussion about an appearance before Congress. Any testimony from this office would not go beyond our report. It contains our findings and analysis and the reasons for the decisions we made. We chose those words carefully, and the work speaks for itself. And the report is my testimony. I would not provide information beyond that which is already public in any appearance before Congress. In addition, access to our underlying work product is being decided in a process that does not involve our office. So beyond what I've said here today and what is contained in our written work, I do not believe it is appropriate for me to speak further about the investigation or to comment on the actions of the Justice Department or Congress. And it's for that reason I will not be taking questions today as well. Now, before I step away, I want to thank the attorneys, the FBI agents, the analysts, the professional staff who helped us conduct this investigation in a fair and independent manner. These individuals who spent nearly 2 years with the special counsel's office were of the highest integrity. And I will close by reiterating the central allegation of our indictments, that there were multiple, systematic efforts to interfere in our election. And that allegation deserves the attention of every American. Thank you. Thank you for being here today. No questions.
Laid out, again, some of the conclusions of that report, laying out systematic interference in our elections by the Russians, saying this is a serious matter. Also laying out that he did not find sufficient evidence, there was insufficient evidence to conclude that the Trump campaign or President Trump himself participated in a conspiracy with the Russians, also explaining why he did not reach a decision on whether or not the president obstructed justice, saying this is a decision he could not reach. A lot to talk about here, a lot to go through. I want to start out with our chief White House correspondent, John Carl. What we did not hear from the special counsel right there in his first and final words are those 4 words we've heard so often from the president: no collusion, no obstruction.
Absolutely, George, and you point out that he said that prosecuting the president was not an option he had because of Department of Justice policies. He could not have drawn up an indictment against the president. But the second thing he said was very significant. He said, if we had confidence the president did not commit a crime, we would have said so. So what you did not hear, as you point out, he did not say that the president was exonerated. He did not say no collusion, no obstruction. And George, he also referred to other processes that would take place beyond the criminal justice system to hold a president accountable. He didn't use the word impeachment, but it seemed to me that the implication was that this would be a matter for Congress to decide, certainly not the Department of Justice.
That certainly does seem to be an implication. I want to bring in our chief legal analyst, Dan Abrams, on this as well. Dan, the special counsel said the report speaks for itself, but this was actually the clearest statement yet we've heard from special counsel Robert Mueller on why he did not reach that decision on obstruction of justice by the president.
Exactly. Instead of 448 pages, you've got a few minutes of him highlighting what he thinks are the most important things to look at. And when he's focusing on in the obstruction area, and that's where he spent the majority of his time, is talking about that obstruction section of his report. And as Jonathan points out, saying that charging the president was not an option, that there's something other than the criminal justice system would have to hold the president accountable. But the most important thing that I heard was he said, as a result, we would not make a decision. He didn't say could not.
Well, he actually said both. He said could not and would not.
No. He first said it was not an option we could consider. Then he said the words would twice. We would, and he emphasized it, would not make a decision. That is very different from an inability to make a decision. And I think he was making it very clear that that was not the issue. The issue was not that they were unable to decide here, but they made a concerted decision not to do that for the reasons laid out in that introduction.
Now I see exactly what you're saying. What he's saying is, first of all, once you consider Department of Justice policy, you almost can't even get to the question.
Exactly, and he's emphasizing that. He said the words would twice. We would not make a decision on that. And I think he's making a clear statement that please don't misunderstand this to say, we threw up our arms or we punted to the Attorney General. He was saying we intentionally didn't do this because, A, we thought it was department policy that you cannot indict a sitting president and that there has to be another entity that holds any president accountable.
One more question on that, and then I want to bring in Chris Christie on the same question. That does seem, and he was silent on this notion that William Barr saying he had to step in and make the decision. That silence actually speaks volumes, because when you actually look at the plain meaning of what Special Counsel Robert Mueller is saying here, is that he says he was following Department of Justice policy. By implication, the Attorney General wasn't?
Well, that is by implication. Look, the problem is, the difference is you can clear someone, right? As Mueller, he didn't clear him. He effectively said that there wasn't enough evidence to charge on the conspiracy, right? And he said if we could find that in the obstruction section, we would have said it. But we couldn't, so we didn't. And then, but by highlighting that, again, it's important to note, he's got, 7 or 8 minutes, however long he was talking here. It's important to think about what was he focusing on here. And he's focusing on why he couldn't do anything on obstruction. This is the same thing we've talked about, and he referred to that introduction, which is the critical section in the obstruction. It's the beginning of it. He laid out 4 reasons, basically, why the investigation is legitimate and why the president, A, can't be charged, and B, you can't even accuse the president of anything in the report, according to Robert Mueller. But the fact that he's emphasizing the multiple systematic efforts to impact the election made it clear that Hillary Clinton was the target of that, and the effort was effectively to harm her campaign, and then to focus on the obstruction section.
Chris Christie, so Democrats are not going to be happy with this decision by Robert Mueller not to testify before the Congress, saying he doesn't want to do that. But clearly some daylight here between what Robert Mueller is saying about his report and what the Attorney General said about the report, what the President has said about the report.
Sure, that's absolutely clear, and Bob Mueller made that clear this morning. I think, George, the point that people should really focus on here is the difference between Bob Mueller and Jim Comey. Now, both men were confronted with these kind of choices and department policy. Bob Mueller played today like an absolute Boy Scout. He said only what was legally and by policy permissible to say. He's letting his report speak for itself, and he's not going to go any further. Contrast that to the summer of 2016, when Jim Comey came out and appointed himself Attorney General, Deputy Attorney General, Special Counsel, and FBI Director, and trashed Hillary Clinton without charging her, violated department policy. I think that, you see a contrast with leaders of the Justice Department. Bob Mueller is someone who's to be respected and who is to be admired. And the contrast with Jim Comey, his successor as FBI Director, is so incredibly stark after today's comments that, quite frankly, Comey should be ashamed of himself.
Chris Christie, thanks very much. I want to bring in our Chief Justice Correspondent, Pierre Thomas, for more on this as well. And, Pierre, you cover the Justice Department every day. You've covered Robert Mueller. You covered William Barr. 2 very different stories here.
Exactly, George. I was struck by the fact that Mueller went out of his way to talk about Justice Department policy. And that policy is that a sitting president cannot be charged. And Mueller said it would be unfair to make a resolution to come to a determination as to whether charges should be filed. That's in direct contrast to what the Attorney General did. He did make the call, and he has criticized Mueller for making that call. So a stark contrast there, George. The other thing that struck me in looking at Mueller today is that he emphasized over and over again that the report speaks for itself, and our sources were telling us for the last several weeks, and we reported on your show and others, that Mueller was very concerned about being called before Congress, not being able to talk beyond the report, and that it would descend into some sort of political circus. He did not want to be a part of that, but he wanted to make sure today that he came out, stated the points that he wanted to make about that there was Russian interference, that it was a serious matter, it was designed to hurt one candidate and hurt another, and that he read that part from the report that struck me. If we could make a determination that a crime was not committed definitively, we would so state, George.
And you have to combine that with, Pierre, thanks very much. I'm going to bring in Cecilia Vega for more on this point. He chose to summarize this report today in those few minutes and the points that he thought were most important. Among them, he doesn't have sufficient evidence to charge a conspiracy, couldn't make a final decision on obstruction, and then, as John Carl pointed out earlier, also said there are other processes available. That is, Congress increases the pressure on the House Speaker for impeachment.
Oh, it certainly does, and these calls from Democrats for impeachment in the House have been growing louder by the day, and many of those Democrats have said that they were waiting to hear from Mueller specifically to decide on impeachment, so this certainly increases the pressure on Nancy Pelosi. And I've got to say, you talked about the way that Mueller summarized this. I think one of the big takeaways here, and the president is not going to be happy about this, is that you now have the investigator on camera for the first time in a very concise, clear soundbite saying, we did not determine whether the president committed a crime. That doesn't look good for him, and that certainly is going to be ammunition for the Democrats going forward.
That'll be ammunition for the Democrats. I want to bring in Terry Moran, also our chief national correspondent here. Robert Mueller, by the book, more than 40-year career in Washington as FBI director, leaves public life as the special counsel, as the way he came in. Again, by the book, but threw a lot of ammunition out there for both sides.
He surely did. By the book, he hopes it's the last time. He is definitely still in the crosshairs of Congress for some kind of testimony, though he made clear he wouldn't say anything further than what he did today. But that was quite a lot, as you are saying. This was actually a sharper edge than the report, if you look at how he arranged it. If we had evidence that could have cleared the president of committing a crime, we would have said so. And then that absolutely crucial line that you've been talking about, the Constitution requires a process other than the criminal justice system to formally accuse a president of wrongdoing. And you look at the report laying out those instances of possible obstruction of justice. This is Robert Mueller saying to Congress, do your job. It is time to take this up. And there isn't much of an appetite for it, not even in the Democratic Party. Just 25 or so Democratic members out of 235 have come out for impeachment. But essentially what this is saying, right up to the conclusion that must be drawn from what Robert Mueller said, if Donald Trump wasn't president of the United States, he'd be charged with a crime.
And what he's saying, Terry Moran, thanks very much. I want to bring in John Carl on this as well, is what he's also saying when he says the report speaks for itself, John Carl, is read that Section 2 on obstruction, members of Congress, come to your conclusions.
Exactly, and it also directly contradicts on that point what Attorney General William Barr said. Barr, in his comments, had said that the special counsel left it up to the Department of Justice to make that determination. And what he is saying here explicitly and without any hesitation is that the Constitution requires processes other than the criminal justice system to accuse a sitting president. In other words, it would not have been up to the Attorney General. The only other process that is conceived in the Constitution is an impeachment process. So if there were to be a determination whether or not what he outlined in that Part 2 of his report regarding obstruction of justice, it would be up to Congress to decide whether or not that amounts to activity that would be a high crime misdemeanor.
So, Chris Christie, I want to bring you in on this as well. Thank you, John. This has been taken away now from the legal processes. That's the word that Robert Mueller used, and being put right back in to the political arena.
Yeah, it is. And listen, I do think that those comments by Bob Mueller about in the other processes, obviously impeachment, being the only constitutional way to accuse the president of wrongdoing, definitely contradicts what the Attorney General said when he summarized Mueller's report and said that he then had to draw the conclusion on that. Mueller clearly contradicts that today in a very concise way. And I think also now, at the end of this, it's kind of what a number of us, Dan and I, have been saying all along, that on the obstruction issue, this was never going to be a Department of Justice or special counsel call. In the end, on a sitting president, this is the call of the Congress playing their role as a co-equal branch of government. And they're now going to have to decide what it is they want to do.
And Dan, let's take it to the next step then, and look at those 10 incidents that, or so incidents that Robert Mueller did outline in his report, laying out possible evidence of obstruction of justice. Is this something Congress can ignore?
Well, look, and some of them are certainly stronger than others. And I think in some cases he's making it clear that he doesn't think that there was enough to find obstruction. But particularly when it comes to Don McGahn, in particular with what the special counsel found was really the president ordering the firing of Mueller, and then demanding that he lie about it. I think in those two instances, Mueller was suggesting that there was enough there for obstruction of justice.
And let me pick
but
up
again,
on... Go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, let me just pick up there, and I want to take that to Terry Moran, because Terry, then when you look at that, when you look at the obstruction of justice charges that Robert Mueller lays out right there, and you combine that with the fact that so far the White House is now saying Don McGahn can't testify, we're not going to send any more information to the Congress on the report, you actually have a building series of pressures on the House Speaker to consider the impeachment, because it's not simply the report in isolation.
Absolutely. Nancy Pelosi will face more and more pressure from that part of her party, significant, but not a majority of her party, that says we have to do this. We have to move forward to vindicate the Constitution and to invest and to impeach Donald Trump. I think there's also going to be building pressure on the courts. Because essentially one of the things that Mueller is saying here is that the Congress has a responsibility spelled out in the Constitution. There's nothing higher, or no higher responsibility than something spelled out in the Constitution. And they need, arguably, reasonably, Don McGahn's testimony in order to carry it out. That is a clash between the presidency and the Congress that will likely end up in court, and Congress has a strong hand in this instance.
Congress has a strong hand. Pierre Thomas, we've also seen that in many of the cases now against the president in the courts, but in the courts between the president and Congress, the courts are actually expediting their decisions.
Yes, they are, George. I think everyone involved, including courts, know the gravity of the situation and that this is not something that should necessarily linger. So I think where you can get relatively quick decisions, you will get those decisions so that the country can have some resolution to this. And, George, the other thing I would say today is watching Mueller, having not spoken in all this time, given the weight of his shadow in Washington, it was something to see. And I think that a lot of people were just wondering what would his demeanor be like. And he was true to form, straight to the point, and as you said, by the book.
The book and the ball now in Congress's court. Robert Mueller has finished his work after more than 2 years, given the final word, saying his report speaks for itself. It will now be up to Congress whether or not to consider impeachment. We'll have much more on ABC News Live. Have a good day.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
Starting Thursday during the
Live from ABC7, this is an Eyewitness News Update.
Good Good morning. I'm Leslie Sykes. Let's get a check of the weather and our AccuWeather forecast with Leslie Lopez.
Hey, and happy Wednesday. We're waking up to some nice conditions. Already sunny throughout most areas in the Southland today. We'll hit about